Hope everybody's having a good weekend. Anyway, the other day I cast this bowl in resin, and I used a cheap set of nested bowls that I bought for just a few dollars. And I took the biggest one and the next one, put them inside each other, and then I poured resin in there. Okay, and today I'm going to try to finish this thing up. Hopefully. I've never done this before, and I'm hoping that I don't end up throwing this thing out of the lathe and knocking a wall down or something, because this thing right here is heavy. It's almost 7 pounds. 7 pounds of solid plastic. It's heavier than I expected. But my plan is that I'm gonna put this thing in the Longworth chuck and go ahead and turn a recess on the bottom that I can grab with my chuck and work on it from there. Just see how it works out. The resin's pretty hard, and I'm not sure how tool techniques like wood turning tool techniques will actually work on this. I know the tools will work, but this bowl is a big experiment for me. So I'm just going to dive right in and try to get started on it. Try not to get killed. So, all right. Well, let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens. Okay, getting started off, I need to clean off this rim here and get all these deformities and sharp edges and all off so it'll sit nice and flat on the Longworth chuck. And if you notice right here in the front, I've cut the spout off with a bandsaw. I just took it over there and cut the spout off. But a lot easier to do that than to have to turn it off on the lathe. Alright, we'll just get her mounted up on the Longworth chuck. Bring up the tailstock once it's centered and hold it in place with the tailstock. Keep everything tight as I tighten down these bolts. I'll just bring the bolts up and then I'll snug them all down opposite sides. And we're going to start out with my 1/2-inch bowl gouge. And all I'm trying to do here is just kind of true up the bottom a little bit so I can get a recess cut to hold in my chuck, to hold the bowl in my chuck. I'm just trying to get a fresh cut all the way across, and that way I know I've got a good flat surface there. Okay. And I'm just going to cut my recess with a parting tool. Better figure out how big I want it first. I don't use recesses very often, but in this case I thought it would be better than the tenon itself. So I'm gonna take this all out with my parting tool. And I'm wanting to go about 3/8 of an inch deep to give me a good mortise for my chuck to grab hold of. So we're just going to work this in, and I'll make a couple of passes side by side. It actually forms a tenon on the inside, but I'm not using that tenon. I'm just using this as for the recess. And nice and flat on the bottom, square on the sides. My chuck is not a dovetail, so I need to make sure it's square and that it's the right depth. And I've got 3/8 of an inch, so we're good to go. Alright, I've got a pressure block here just to make sure the bowl stays in the chuck. It just allows the tailstock to help me hold everything in place. Then we're just going to try to get started truing this thing up. I found out that I needed a glove because the the pieces coming off of this thing were, I mean, it was like a sandblaster. So it really hurts. so I put on a glove, but I try to keep it away from the bowl as much as possible, and away from any of the equipment that's rotating. So here I'm making some pull cuts and some push cuts. I was just kind of experimenting to try to find out, you know, which way I like the best. Like I say, this was the first cast bowl I've tried to do. They're very hard, but a sharp tool, you know, you can shape with them. But I found that a pull cut actually works better than a push on this. I really like using a push cut for that nice fine finishing cut that it gives. But these pull cuts are good for roughing, and right now I'm just trying to true it up. And once I get it true, I'm just going to scrape. Just going to use a shear scrape. Still doing some pull cuts to get out rough spots. I had no air bubbles in this thing that I could ever find. Pouring that casting really slow, and from a high, pouring it up real high, about 6 or 8 inches above the molds, really helped a lot. I thank Brendan Stemp for that pointer right there, because I believe, you know, you have bubbles that actually escape while it's being poured before it ever even gets into the mold. So there's very few bubbles to begin with, and the ones that are in there, the Silmar 41 is very viscous, and it allows them to rise to the top and get popped. Here I'm making some push cuts, and this was the only place a push cut worked really well. It was pretty much pull cuts everywhere else and scraping. I found scrapers work really well, turning this resin. Here I am just doing some final shaping and all with my 1/2 inch bowl gouge. Just working on the bottom and the curve coming up from the bottom all the way up the wall. Make sure your wall thickness is good. I check it several times just to make sure. And you've got to be careful in the bottom, because you've got a recess in there, and it's 3/8 inches deep. So trying to leave this bowl about 5/8 inches thick in the walls, I've got to be very careful in the bottom. So I decided to leave like a dome shape in the bottom of the bowl, and you can kind of see it here. And I found that my curved tool rest also really helps, because it keeps the tool rest really close to the work. These resins are really hard, and they like to make your tools chatter. Chatter does not look good on these. Tear out on a bowl like this is really bad, because you have to cut more out, and that's, you know, that can result in further problems. Okay, once I get it kind of trued up, I'm going back with my scraper and my round nose scraper, and we're just going to smooth everything up really nice. Make sure everything's nice and flat, and no tool marks and things like that. And this thing worked really well. You can't tell from this angle, but the handle is up higher, and it's kind of in a negative rake, sort of. it's not flat, it's just the handle's a little high. Now I'll sand this thing from 60 to 2,000 grits, and I'm going to be wet sanding the whole thing. And the reason I like to wet sand this plastic is because it really heats up fast, and when it heats up, it starts almost kind of melting, and it clogs your sandpaper like crazy. So I'll sand with the lathe running, and then I'll come right back and knock off those parallel lines with just little circles by hand. And I'll do this with every grit. And check very carefully for any places that you miss, because this first grit is extremely important, because it's going to do it'll do 90% of the work that needs to be done. So if you've got any bad spots or anything that need to be sanded out, this is the grit to do it with. The rest of the grits are just to take out those scratches from the sandpaper. So anyway, I think we've about got the bottom done. So now we'll move to the inside. We'll do it the same way. We'll just wet sand and keep water going in there, because that stuff will heat up really fast if it starts to dry. And the water going to the inside of the bowl in there, it all wants to come running out really fast and get thrown all over your shop. It took a lot of water to wet sand this bowl. It was that whole bottle. I used that whole bottle. Okay. Now we got the outside and the inside sanded. Now we're going to start working on the bottom. I've taken it off the chuck, and now I've got it on the Longworth. And if you notice here, I don't have my tailstock up. The Longworth chuck holds just fine. But then again, it's not polished either. The bowl's not polished. So I believe its grip is pretty good. Those little rubber boots, they grip really well. There again, using pull cuts just to kind of shape the bottom. And I wanted this kind of domed like this. You know, you could do it ever how you wanted to, but just making light pull cuts all the way across until you get it the way you want. And this takes time. It's not a very easy process to do, to keep from chattering and everything else. If it chatters, you're in trouble, because it'll leave little spiral marks on there that just look like crap, and you have to go back and take all of that out, and it's just a headache. Okay, then we come right back and we scrape everything down with round nose scraper again, and we'll be done with all the turning. I'll sand the bottom just exactly like I did the sides and the outside and the inside. Now, I tried to, I was going to use the Alumilite Clear Cast, which is a bar top type resin, and I'm just going to brush it on. I thought that it may level pretty good, so because that's kind of, you know, what it does. So anyway, I've already signed it and everything, and this will put my signature under a layer of epoxy, and we'll just brush it on. And hopefully the brush strokes will just kind of all level out, and it should look like glass when this stuff cures up. Okay, and there we go. All right. Okay. Well, that was a fail. It just did not work out the way I wanted it to. Basically, I brushed on the outside here with a really slow curing epoxy. It was a Alumilite epoxy, the Easy Cast. It's made for casting over countertops and things like that. I thought it would work really well on this, but it didn't. So I'm going to see if I can show this to you, how this finish turned out. And you can see it's just all rough and everything. It just didn't smooth out the way that I thought it would. So anyway, plan B. Okay. Plan B is going to be remounting this thing on the lawnmower chuck and putting a tenon on it. I'm going to put a tenon on it so I can remount it on the lathe, and then I can return all this rough stuff off, resand, and then once I resand it, I'm going to polish it like I do my pins and my bottle stoppers and things like that, which includes using rubbing compounds and carnauba wax. And it works really well on my pins and bottle stoppers. I thought this may be too big, but you know, beggars can't be choosers, I guess. So anyway, that's why it's been a while since I've done this part 2. I apologize for that. I just got so frustrated and disheartened with this project, I almost threw it away. But I'm going to try this now, and I think it's going to turn out good. And well, we'll just see. I probably should have done this on the lathe to begin with. But anyway, alright, let's get started on it. Okay, well, with that failure, it's back on the Longworth chuck. Thank goodness I do have a Longworth chuck. I've turned a waste block that I'm going to glue onto the bottom of this thing to serve as a tenon, so I can put this thing back in the chuck and get it resanded. So anyway, I'm just using a 15-minute epoxy, which is it's Loctite. Actually, I got it at Home Depot. Very strong epoxy, and that's what I needed. Okay, well, it's cured up, and now I'm just going right back. I've just got to take off that layer of epoxy that I had put on there and resand these surfaces again. I'm also going to resand the inside as I go. So we're just going to try to cut off that layer and get it back nice and smooth once again. Alright, now, okay, I've been all the way through my sanding. I'm at my 2000 grit now. I just didn't show all the sanding because I figured, you know, it's the exact same process I was doing earlier. The exact same process. But I thought I would show the final grit here and polishing. And if you notice, I keep a steady stream of water. Almost a steady stream. I don't want that sandpaper to get dry. And yes, I made a big mess in the shop. Okay, there again, just kind of going against those parallel striations around the bowl. from the sandpaper and just making circles to take out those lines, those really fine scratches left by the 2000 grit. Then we'll rinse it off a little bit, dry it down, wipe it all out and dry it down good. Now it's time to polish, and what I'm going to use is rubbing compound, turtle wax rubbing compound. And this is a very fine grit, and I'm going to do it just exactly like I did the sanding. I'm just going to use the rubbing compound to smooth out any of those little scratches left by the 2000 grit. I'll do the entire bowl except the bottom. I've still got to take the tenon off of it. There again, I'm going against those I don't want any regular shapes in here. Even at this fine a grit, I don't want you to see the scratches, the microscopic scratches that are left by this rubbing compound. So I go back and make circles, and then it's time to buff. Speed up the lathe. I'm running about 1000 RPMs here, and see, you can see through the lathe as my hand's behind the bowl. You can see my hand through the bowl, actually right there, and that buffs up really nice. And I'll put another coat of rubbing compound on here, and that's what I'm doing now. I'll do this twice. Same process as sanding. You can just, use this just like a final sanding. Okay, buffer down, and you don't have to let the rubbing compound cure before you buff it. It'll buff out while it's dry, or while it's wet. It'll buff out. But you want to make sure all of it's gone, and then you put your final coat. And I'm using Turtle Wax Express Shine. It's a hard carnauba wax, and it just sprays on and wipes off, and it leaves a great shine. You just mist it on, and then you just wipe it off, or wipe it around. You wipe it around, and then you buff it. And it leaves a beautiful shine. A beautiful shine once you buff it out. And I did 2 coats of this, although 1 coat will pretty much do everything you need. I did 2 coats. And there we go. Well, alright, there it is. The end of another long-awaited project. Well, I got all the way through my polishing and everything. I was taking the tenon off the bottom with my Longworth chuck, and booyah! Well, crap happens, right? My little oak tree outside keeps dropping acorns on my shop. No, this is what happens. I was taking the tenon off and had my tailstock up until right there at the end. I was going to take my tailstock off, take my tailstock back and sand up the very bottom and polish it up, so I could sign it and all, and kablooey. things happen in the shop. Luckily, you know, I was out of line of fire. I was wearing my face shield, and well, you know, that's the way it goes. But the techniques, the bowl, the polishing of the bowl really came out really nice. I mean, you can see the polish on the bowl. Looked real good. It was beautiful until it came out of my Longworth chuck. So one thing to remember is if you're using a Longworth chuck, keep your tailstock up. That's the first thing I've ever thrown out of it, and I guess it was because it's very hard plastic and it was polished extremely slick. But anyway, you know, sorry. You know, crap happens. This has been over about a month it's taken on this project here, mainly because I had my first failure on it. This was my first cast bowl, and I believe I said that in my first video. But what I was trying to do was I was going to try to put like a gel coat over the bowl, another coat of epoxy that would level out and smooth out and just be, you know, perfectly glossy. Well, it didn't work out so well. I think I used the wrong type of epoxy. I used a bar top type epoxy. I figured it would flow. It's a very slow cure, but it was a little bit too thick for doing this bowl, and it didn't run right. So anyway, had to sand all of that off. Every bit of that had to come off and go all the way back through my grits again and polish it. But I used the turtle wax rubbing compound. You know, I was thinking before, this is what I use on my pens and bottle stoppers and everything now. I have seen some very shiny cars, and most of them, you know, people use rubbing compound on them to get that surface just really glass-like smooth before they put, you know, their final coats of sealant and stuff on them, but wax. And so I thought I would try it here, and it really works great. The finish, I mean, the finish on that is just, it's just superb. It's just beautiful. But, you know, I wish I could have kept the bowl. You know, crap happens. But if I had been doing this with any other type of epoxy, some epoxy that cost me $100 a gallon, I would have about $80 worth of epoxy in this. The Silmar 41 cost me about $35 a gallon, and you know, so I've got probably $27 to $28 in this bowl. But when it comes out of the lathe about 200 miles an hour and hits the bedways, it doesn't matter what it's made out of, it's going to look like this. So anyway, I got me a new tool I'm gonna be trying out pretty soon. It is the Kelton McNaughton center saver thing, coring type tool, and I'm gonna be trying that out. I've got a lot of big logs that I'm wanting to make bowls out of, and if you remember my elm bowl I did a couple months ago, I guess, I had huge pile of shavings in here. It was just unbelievable how much wood was actually wasted. That some of the shavings is what I used in this bowl here. But I'm hoping that because I can get a lot more of those elm blanks and some pecan and several other types of wood. I got some maple up there too. That I can actually core out and get, you know, more bowls out of one blank. So I'm going to be trying that out. I'm really excited about it. You know, and I just can't wait to try it. Guys, I hope y'all enjoyed this project. Sorry it took so long. I've got my son is going to be leaving pretty soon, and I've just been trying to spend more time with him until he leaves. And Semper Fi, son. You guys have a good day, and we'll see y'all down the road.